Hello, I'm David Scheid, co-founder of RICO Busters. I'm here with another story to show you how the usurpers of our power and authority in state and federal governments never cease to amaze me in the number of egregious ways they act. In what amounts to a perverse and sickly fashion, to crush the freedoms of we Americans and our will to live under such conditions of cruel and tyrannical oppression. These types of people are absolutely evil, and they need to be put down, imprisoned, and eliminated from our civilized society forever. Join me in witness to the abomination that is taking place against one of our own brethren, a brother in Christ, a minister of righteousness, a man targeted by the evildoers in retaliation for his blowing the whistle on corruption and exposing the domestic terrorism that has inundated our once great nation. Welcome to RICO Busters. Might there be anyone out there who has received a letter like this, either by return email or by the standard snail mail? It's a form letter, full of rhetoric, from a politician. It's a lot of words that say nothing in answer to a complaint. This one was written by the Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker. What a guy! He's the same one that has helped make the word corruption part of Wisconsin's state creed, and dark money central to the fascist government's business as usual. As I've come to find out, the John Doe case in Wisconsin, the one being referenced in the national news, has crossed state lines to meet with political corruption in Michigan. And what is breaking right now in this goes clearly to show what the dark money of the American terrorist network is doing and how it takes on the color of red for the blood that is shed by the Republican crime syndicate working under only the color of their own laws and not under the supreme laws of our land, being the state and the United States constitutions. In this letter, the gubernatorial usurper and kingpin for the Wisconsin domestic terrorist wrote a letter that illustrates precisely how the usurpers of the people's authority and power in Wisconsin look the other way and mimic the proverbial three wise monkeys. The question I have is it wise in the long run to continually sit on the fence and look the other way while usurpers of our God-given gifts of freedom and prosperity are stripping those things away from us, from our fellow Americans, from our children, and from our future generations of Americans? I'm not the only one answering this question with a resounding no. Neither is Reverend Jason Goodwill, a man who stood up to expose political and financial corruption in Wisconsin, starting with the dirty cops in the town of Sheboygan, where he had inadvertently moved to when simply seeking to get closer to needed medical attention. He is the John Doe of the news, and this is the exclusive story that the terrorists running Wisconsin government have been fighting for years to keep under wrap, at all cost, in life and death. I've got the recorder rolling now. I'd like to ask you if this John Doe case that I'm reading about in Wisconsin is one and the same as the John Doe that you had mentioned, because it seems to involve the corruption that goes and dark money that goes all the way up to the governor and the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
Yes, it is, and it's a combination of several criminal investigations that weren't originally associated, which led to all of it being combined together. My aspect of it was originally, how is it that these dirty cops are getting away with so many crimes in Sheboygan? And then, how is it that the Sheboygan officials are getting away with so much crime and corruption? And ultimately the answer becomes, well, because they've got very high-ranking state officials, in their back pockets. And Governor Scott Walker being one of them, involved in, various criminal activities within Sheboygan and its government.
Well, and do you have any idea how this ties into the Koch brothers? Because I've been noticing that they're in the news as well.
I don't know all the details of it because, once again, that's an aspect from another criminal investigation into the corruption, and I'm not personally privileged to it, but what the whole case is building up to is when you've got so many different facets of corruption that are showing up, when you've got racketeering, when you have union busters, when you have governor basically saying the court officials and the city officials don't even have to follow the law, and he'll protect them in this regard, and it's all coming together in one place.
Does that reflect?
None of us have been able to take him down, but it's hoped that together, all of these cases combined, will do it. But it's dangerous. People are disappearing over it.
They've got some bills here that are going to make government less accountable, less transparent, and more corruptible by way of making it easier for them to hold back information under FOIA requests. And the transparency in government seems to be going by the wayside.
Wisconsin wants to do away with open public record laws. Wisconsin wants to do away with any kind of internet access, any kind of government access, anything that would reveal the crimes and corruption they are involved in, and while at the same time they are pushing hard to promote the slander, libel, and defamation of anyone who opposes them.
Well, and that would include the trumped-up charges like the ones that are against you. And it looks like while they're trying to close down transparency on government, they're trying to make things, I won't say transparent, but colored for the rest of us.
Correct. If you look at what happened with Walker busting the unions in the state, as soon as he was able to pull that off, the rest of the state started doing the same thing. If he succeeds in his efforts to basically make it impossible to gather information on the crimes that he and his cohorts and everybody under him are committing, full well the rest of the state's going to follow. It's going to set a precedence, and it's going to mean there will be no representation of the government for the people. It will be completely in black and white, in paper, the government against the people.
Now, getting back to Scott Walker's form letter of rhetorical email response, let's review exactly what specific comments this so-called governor is promising to keep in mind as he rolls on in leading his illustrious state further down the corruption tubes, and with an open door for the complainant to call again any time for similar assistance from this useless government leech. It's clear that the letter is one of humanitarian content, such as from a friend or neighbor of Jason Goodwill, or perhaps a person concerned about how the local and regional governments are acting outside of their delegated authority to terrorize this person and perhaps the greater community of state citizens. In fact, it's a letter that was addressed to the acting mayor of Sheboygan, Vanderstein, with the Wisconsin state governor copied on a warning to Vanderstein that we the people intend to have the last word on this Sheboygan Webgate scandal, and that in the end, the truth will prevail over all. Written just less than a month ago on May 20th, 2016, the letter reads like this. Mayor Vanderstein, you and the city of Sheboygan are about to face a very embarrassing revival of some of Sheboygan's most notorious national political disgraces, the Sheboygan Webgate scandal. The political corruption and police crimes were so profound that even famous comedian Jay Leno poked fun at Sheboygan. It involved then Police Chief Kirk, Mayor Perez, Judge Langhoff, and an assortment of other dirty cops, affairs with Jennifer Reisinger, criminal misuse of department resources, blackmail, extortion, fabrication of evidence, false charges, false imprisonment, cover-ups, conspiracies, assault, landmark lawsuits, RICO suits, millions in damages and settlements, and many resignations. What it didn't have was justice for the insured parties or prison for the real criminals. It has been nearly a decade, and still innocent people are paying the price for Sheboygan's crimes. I speak in particular of one man, a Reverend Goodwill, who had never had a criminal record until the day he turned over evidence of police crimes to the mayor's office. The following day he was assaulted, falsely imprisoned, and charged with dozens of felonies by the very same cops against whom he had provided evidence. Reverend Goodwill spent years falsely imprisoned with the Sheboygan County Detention Center. There, subjected to long-term torture, poisoned, and nearly starved to death, his civil liberties violated, his due process was ignored. When after more than 5 dozen fraudulent charges were finally dismissed, Sheboygan did the most damaging thing they could do to a minister. They committed libel, slander, defamation, and told the media he was a child rapist. He was unlawfully, in violation of due process, called convicted, after a hearsay witness testified for the dirty cops in exchange for drug charges being dropped, that Reverend Goodwill had shown her nude photos on a computer. The hearsay committed numerous counts of perjury, admitted police had instructed her in what to say, was already an established prostitute, and had 2 eyewitnesses testify against her. In addition, a forensic specialist proved to the court that police had fabricated and tampered with evidence. The DA was proven to have committed no less than 2 counts of exculpatory. The U.S. Constitution makes it clear that where ineffectualness of counsel, civil rights violations, and due process of law have been violated, no lawful conviction can be made. This, of course, didn't stop Sheboygan. He lost his home, business, reputation, and nearly his life, just so the city could protect broken badges. It is a defamation that has plagued him ever since, to this very day. Around 2011, he escaped your godforsaken town with a discharge and clean record, whereupon he joined in a RICO suit against Sheboygan. He had no probation, no parole, and more to the point, no sex offender-related charge. Appeals we made. The ACLU was brought in only to say after half a year that the corruption was so widespread they couldn't afford to handle the case. No one in the Wisconsin judicial system would raise a finger to uphold the American civil rights. In 2013, some of these same dirty cops, those who did not resign and who were never sent to prison where they belonged, went after the RICO plaintiffs, including Reverend Goodwill. They went across state lines and once again, by use of fraud and fabricated evidence, obtained a warrant with the aid of Sandy Cornell. Reverend Goodwill was federally kidnapped, false imprisoned once again, and obstructed from testifying. All of this based on the false charge that he had not filed as a sex offender. In accordance with U.S. Constitution, he was never charged with a crime. On the record with the DOC, he was never required to register. Because of the fraud and kidnapping, along with other conditions, he was released, all charges dismissed by the prosecutor, but only after another half a year of his life had been thrown away. Now, here we are again, dirty cops, fraudulent attempts at warrants, false imprisonment, and once again based on the falsified claim from Sheboygan that he is supposed to be a registered sex offender. Even had due process been upheld and civil liberties not violated, in short, a legal charge and conviction, the charge does not meet any criteria of the Adam Walsh Act. In early June, Reverend Goodwill goes to court to face felony charges of failing to register as a sex offender. At that time, since this is a felony charge, a full investigation will be made into all the evidence he has. And he has a lot more than I briefly covered in this letter. Things such as the complete deposition of former officer John Winter, riddled with perjury and felony confessions, and why he resigned in disgrace, though he deserved life in prison. This means every one of the named persons will be subpoenaed and investigated. How Reverend Goodwill was ever charged under such criminal conditions will be investigated to prove due process was violated. Civil rights violations will be investigated. How a non-SOAR case placed him on the SOAR list will be investigated. And my favorite, how much money would the entire state of Wisconsin's judicial system lose because of Sheboygan's violating the Adam Walsh Act? If he is still alive and in the area, you might just want to consult with former DA DeKecko on this, as he knows firsthand. It's a whole lot of ugliness and justice coming your way, Mayor. Now, if you are amenable to avoiding all this ugliness being brought back to light, gaining Sheboygan further national attention for its political corruption and so forth, I would love to hear what Sheboygan will do to rectify the matter. But don't take too long. Once the trial starts, so do the investigations. And without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Jason Goodwill. Jason, welcome to RICO Busters.
Thank you, David.
I want to get into all the aspects of your story here, and was wondering if you might be able to just give us an idea of how you got started in Sheboygan. You seem to have run into all this corruption there, and I'd like to get an idea of your background. It sounds like you've got a lot of technology, a lot of community assistance, a lot of involvement in the communities that you've lived at, and you know, I don't know, other than through the corruption of government, how anybody with such an honorable background could end up in a situation like the one you're in. Can
Thanks,
you give us
Dave.
an idea how all this got started?
Well, going from my background, I was born and raised in Escanaba, Michigan. I was one of the first recipients ever for a full scholarship through Mead Paper Company back in 1986. I was 16 at the time. I helped to establish several advanced schooling courses in their new ISD project to help students who had accelerated learning. In 1987, I created Mr. Fix-It, a local repair shop, basically a business in Escanaba. 1988, I opened the Main Street Pinball and Arcade Repair Center. You know, these are all things that profited the city. In 1989, I helped to overhaul and rebuild Orphan Annie's and Club Connections. By 1990, I decided to take my business on the road and started touring the world. Servicing basically rock bands that were on tour with equipment that would break down. Throughout the years, I did a lot of artwork, photography. I earned various degrees, certificates, awards. And in 2004, I actually worked within law enforcement. For anyone who's worked in law enforcement, you know they do a very grueling background check.
Absolutely.
I passed the background check. 2007, I started having significant health problems. I'd always had health problems, and I was told I could expect increased problems as I got older. These problems arose in the way of epilepsy and lupus. There's really no there's no cure for the epilepsy. There is a treatment. I do take the treatment. For lupus, there is more advanced treatment, but there are only a handful of medical practitioners in the United States who treat lupus. One of them was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Now, I'd never heard of Sheboygan before, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense to travel between states several times a week, so I moved to Sheboygan. I did not know the level of corruption in Sheboygan. I did not know how dirty the cops were. At that point, I still had a decent respect for law enforcement and a belief in the judicial system. Sheboygan would eventually destroy that belief. Now, when I was in Sheboygan, in order to help out the community, well, I should also mention that throughout my years, I've studied a great deal of religions. That was one of the nice things about traveling around the world, is I got to study world religions firsthand. I became an ordained minister, and while in Sheboygan, in order to contribute back to their community, I helped to establish soup kitchens, shelters, rescue missions, worked with the local Salvation Army to improve upon conditions for the homeless. In short, I contributed significantly to the communities that I've been in. The problem occurred when I was doing some service call work. With my knowledge in computers and securities, I made, I would pass my time and do a little side business with upgrading people's securities on their computers and setting up websites. I'd apply my combined computer and artistic skills to create customized websites. And for a while, this all went very well until the end of 2007, and that is basically when my life fell apart and was irreparably damaged.
So it seemed to me that you were part of a community and contributing to the community, but you weren't part of the good old boys network then, the one that you
Correct.
were about to discover.
Right. No, I mean, I've lived a fairly simple life for the most part. Exception of a few years with the bands. You see a lot of things when you're traveling with bands and traveling around the world. But otherwise, I've lived a quiet life. I do artwork. I do photography as a hobby. I study religions, and I've done what I can to help when I could and where I could.
That sounds like the classic American dream. You people come over here from all parts of the world to, based on America's reputation of the free, and you lived the life that you wanted to live. It sounded like.
Pretty much, I didn't get into trouble. I didn't go around causing trouble. I wasn't the kind of person who, and you've got to consider too, with my religious background, I hear a lot of confessions from people. I obviously can't go into what they are in detail or who, but point being, I hear about a lot of things, and I just go, I'm not judgmental, but I'm glad that wasn't me. I didn't do these things. I'm not out there making drugs. I'm not out there beating women. I'm not out there robbing banks. And, it's just not my character. It never has been.
Well, I believe that.
All right. Well, it's what I now refer to these days as the first wave. And what happened is, there was a local freelancer who, her name is Jennifer Reisinger. She did a lot of news article reporting on local government corruption. And she got a hold of me because she heard I could work on computers and expressed a concern that she felt her computer was being broken into, quite possibly by dirty cops. She wanted her system secured. She wanted it checked out and improved. Any way I could improve things for her. Now, I figured here we have a person who's doing the community a world of service by reporting on the corruption in the area. And I did so. I started working on her computers and securing them. Now, what happened is during the inspections of her computers, I came across some very unusual information. For people who understand internet and computers, there are certain things that will jump out like a neon sign, such as internal intranet addresses. These are addresses that are only used by city officials. Information going, let's say, between an attorney and the courthouse, or between the police department and a judge. These are not addresses that the general public is ever supposed to have or even know. And here we are, this information is in her system. So I dug further. I mean, this is a curiosity for me. This is not something that typically happens. So I began to investigate, and what I found chilled me to the bone. It was conversations between persons unknown at that time and Miss Reisinger, where Reisinger was being fed direct information from internal IPs that they stick out like a neon sign if you know what you're looking at. And curiosity getting to me, I decided to track them back because one of the problems she was complaining about is potential hackers in her system. As it turns out, these are conversation logs back and forth between city police officers and Miss Reisinger. And what they had been doing is feeding her internal information before it would ever go through the courts or make the media. This is where she was deriving all of her inside contact information on the corruption of city officials. The thing is, though, what chilled me to the bone is that I should give a little background. The Sheboygan Police Department and the Sheboygan's mayor office were in the same building at that time. And there was a race war that was taking place. The new mayor, Mayor Juan Perez, was the first non-white mayor in the city's history. And the city has a long history of racism. The police department declared that they refused to operate their department out of the same building, and I'm quoting, as a spick mayor.
Sounds a little bigoted.
So, yeah. Now, what these conversations were messages between the police department and Reisinger to frame the mayor's son for crimes that the kid had never committed. His name is C.V. Perez. And basically what they wanted to do was release to the media that this kid was guilty of various sex crimes and drug smuggling, and use it to blackmail the mayor into leaving office. That takes some brass. I ran off copies of these logs. I ran off copies of the conversations, and I got out of there as quickly as I could.
Did the woman know? The woman was in on it, the one that called you in.
It turns out, yeah, she had to be in on it because, she was the one who was posting all this political information.
Got it.
I got out of there as quickly as I could, and I made copies. I sent the copies around to a couple of trusted friends, let them know that I was going to take this evidence to the mayor's office. I did. The mayor's office arranged a safe place to meet. I met with the resource director. Her name is Susan Hart, and the assistant, Rebecca Breesy, on several occasions. I told them that I wanted to leave the area. I did not feel safe because of the fact that if these cops had enough brass to blackmail the mayor, they would have no qualms about doing nasty things to a witness to their crimes. And I was told, no, you cannot leave. There's a Wisconsin law that says if you are a witness to police officers committing felony crimes, you must testify or you yourself can be sent to prison. I said, well, I've performed my civic duty to this point. I really didn't like the situation, but if that was the law, that is what I would do. I did not get the opportunity to present my case in person. The next day, the same cops who were involved in these crimes charged me with dozens of felony crimes, literally dozens. They went stormtrooper. They broke into my place. They broke into my friend's place. They broke open briefcases. They stole computers. They made it very clear they were after the evidence. They severely assaulted me. I was in recovery for months. Wow. To this day, they swore they never touched me, and yet even other officers and multiple eyewitnesses testified to the fact that I had been severely assaulted. And essentially stuck me in a private prison in Sheboygan and disappeared me for many, many years.
Oh my
while
gosh.
I fought off this wave of felony charges.
Now, Jason, I've been looking through some of the documents that you sent to me, and what I've found here is dated in March of 2009, and it indicates that this is a confession, a written confession by Jenny or Jennifer Reisinger. Can you tell me how you got a hold of this? I mean, this explains how you got beat up and the whole situation there. So I was wondering if you could tell me how you got it and anything about it.
Well, it was very interesting. I got a message from the mayor's office that they wanted to meet with me, and they wanted to take me up to Madison to talk with the L&C law firm up there. I agreed. I went with them, and while we were there, Susan Hart, who is the resources director for the city of Sheboygan and the first assistant to the mayor, we were presented with some paperwork from LNC, and they had already gone through the process of having the FBI investigate it. And what we got was, we didn't receive it. We were loaned temporarily just to review a letter from Ms. Rixinger, and large portions of it had been blacked out. And I was asked if the content that had not been blacked out, to me, seemed like it was her. Based on the content that was viewable, I said, yeah, that sounds just like her, and some of the things that were stated in there, such as other eyewitnesses, matched what was being said in the letter. And that was important because it means it's not just Reisinger's statement, but it also collaborates with other eyewitnesses who say that, all of the stuff happened, that they were witnesses to it. Afterwards, we had to return the letters, and I didn't hear anything about it for some time afterwards, until my attorney came to me one day and said that he had acquired a copy of a letter and wanted to know if I knew anything about it. And this was probably close to 6 months after having gone to the L&C law firm in Madison. So I looked at it, and the formatting was a little different, but it was essentially the same body of text that was in the letter that L&C had shown. And this one, though, had all the text available. It wasn't all blacked out. So in going over it, I realized there was so much more information in there. However, by the time my attorney had received it, I had already been through the mock trial. If that evidence had been available at the time instead of withheld, it could have made a world of difference in my case.
That part of the exculpatory evidence that you were talking about?
Absolutely. And the other interesting thing about that letter is that, see, there had been witnesses who testified to the fact that the cops had threatened to kill me and had threatened to do nasty things to them if they had anything more to do with me or tried to help me. That letter from Reisinger supports that same statement, and some of the statements in that letter are the same things that were said in that federal deposition of Officer Winter when he lied through his teeth to the federal courts before resigning. So that letter was very important because it ties the witness statements together, it ties the deposition together, it ties more evidence of exculpatory from the prosecution together, and it was never allowed to be entered into court.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to enter it into this court of public opinion in this story, and I think I'd like to read it verbatim all the way through.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful.
Thank you very much. So in reading through this letter and what appears to be the confession of one Jenny or Jennifer Reisinger, it starts like this. It was dated on, looked like March 20th or 28th of 2009. To those this may concern. This is a confession of sorts, and most likely my suicide note, as I will likely be killed for sending this information out. I want to start out by apologizing. You can't imagine the hell I've been through. I never wanted things like this, but I didn't have much choice. In 2004, I'd gotten myself into yet more trouble with finances. Over the years, I've done some things I'm not proud about in order to live a lifestyle I can't afford. It was then I met John Winter, a cop, who took a liking to me, even though he is married. In exchange for certain favors, he promised me that he could keep me out of trouble and set me up financially so that I'd never have to work again. His plan was simple. He would pass along confidential information to me to be leaked into the internet via my websites and wait for a high-ranking official to do something stupid. He said in Sheboygan it didn't take long. For me, however, this plan was taking longer than I could manage as I went further and further into debt. As months and years went by, Winter and his partners Jeff Johnston, Joel Clark, and Todd Preby provided me with a lot of information. Eventually, we were able to get Juan Perez involved. With some pushing, we managed to get Perez to attack me. Yes, what he did was wrong, but we provoked the anger that spawned his response. This was Winter and Clark's plan, not mine. Jeff and Todd rarely had direct involvement and mainly worked in the office altering records and destroying evidence to manipulate cases for John and Joel. With my knowledge of computers, John's knowledge of the internet, the rest using police resources to alter facts and publish them as truths, and the idiots at the Sheboygan Ragmag press so eager to vomit up any sort of story, it wasn't difficult in setting up Perez for the attack, and unfortunately, others too. Sadly, this left me in no position, as I'm a coward. Many times I wanted out, but John made it very clear the horrors that awaited me if I ever betrayed him. I was an unwitting victim of my own actions. I have been blackmailed for years now because of it. Shortly after the lawsuit started is when Jason entered the picture. I can't repeat how very truly sorry I am for all that happened to him. He really didn't deserve it. We met early November 2007 over dinner. At that time, he was in horrible shape with his apartment, having caved in on him and the city doing nothing about it. He had lost artwork and many computers because of it, much of which was his income, as he had many health problems. Anyway, we hit it off and started working together, rebuilding his business. He knows so much, it's amazing. In weeks, with my help, he had already begun to rebuild his network, focusing hard on the largest money-making parts of his website. bolstering his herbal company and cross-linking to mine. He was well on his way to recovery. He had estimated that in 8 months' time he could recover his losses and leave the city that had done this to him far behind. Unfortunately, I needed him. More precisely, I needed his resources. Winter's plan had taken years and was working, but several things were wrong. Most annoying was that I both hate and fear Winter and wanted to be free of his clutches. Jason is a very large man, and while he has health issues, he is still very strong. Winter found out that I was dating someone. Not only did Winter start having my place watched, he and Clark began making plans to use Jason as their scapegoat. To complicate things further, Jason was running his own private investigation into how such corruption could exist in Sheboygan. Why were slumlords being protected? How such corruption could exist in Sheboygan? Why were slumlords being protected? And why was the racism so bad? Why did the cops refuse to protect the people? How could felons run stories and refuse to pay wages, yet not get any attention? And why were the courts refusing to recognize tenant rights? And part of that private investigation came back to several dirty cops, mainly Todd, who was the do-nothing cop, and his partner, Winter, already under criminal investigation for his internet attacks against Perez. I thought for certain that I'd be free once internal affairs put Winter away, but no, once again the law failed. When Jason caught me accepting evidence from Winter, I knew something had to be done. Afraid, I told Winter that Jason made copies of the reports Winter leaked to me. He and Clark quickly made plans to deal with the problem. They never did get specific with me as to what those plans were. By January 2008, I was so deep into trouble with these cops. I had no choice but to do what they said when I was told to contact Jason and bait him to a friend's place. I stayed in my car and watched long enough to see Winter lead his cop friends into an assault on Jason where they beat the shit out of him. I couldn't stand any more and drove off. What was I to do? Call the police? It would be weeks before I heard anything more. All Winter could say is that I'd never have to worry about Jason again. Several days after the beating, Winter and Clark brought over all sorts of computer equipment and asked me to unlock anything I could, since it was all password protected, software as well as hardware. I recognized many of the pieces as being from Jason's network. Most of it was too well protected to be of use. Anything I couldn't use, Winter and Clark discarded. Once I had gotten my own business back to running smoothly, everything else was discarded. John personally went through my place and threw out anything of Jason's that might prove he was ever there. He even destroyed our family Christmas DVD, since it included Jason and I on it. I went over to Terry's, Dave's, and Mike's, friends of Jason's, to see if they knew anything about Jason. I found out that Dave and Mike had both been run out of town by Winter and that Terry was leaving. Terry told me that the cops had told him Jason was a serious criminal, guilty of many horrible crimes, and that because Terry had helped Jason, he would also go to prison if Terry didn't leave town immediately. Further, Terry was told he was never supposed to speak with me again. That was the last we spoke. It was mid-March 2008 when I discovered what had become of Jason. He wrote me a letter from prison, where he was being held for the crimes of fraud, credit card theft, rape, burglary, and more, all of which he said I had charged him. He was so angry I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to explain, tried to tell him it wasn't me, but I didn't hear from him again until months later. I talked to Winter about it, and he told me that if I didn't work with him, he would charge me with filing a false police report. I refused. I actually refused. For it, I was beaten. Winter didn't charge me, but he did tell everyone that I had done it, filed those charges. I thought for sure that once Jason got to court, everything would get thrown out as I refused to file charges, but Winter and Clark made other arrangements. They planted evidence and had driven off all of Jason's friends. They destroyed his life, his business, his reputation, and framed me for it. Then they made certain Jason would get the worst lawyer Sheboygan had to offer. They manipulated evidence, as I've seen them do for years, and they buried Jason in a prison for nearly half a year, assured that he would never get out. I don't know what happened then, but Winter came over, furious that Jason had gotten his attorney fired and was getting released very soon. Winter told me that if he found out Jason was over here, he'd kill us both. And I believe him. Several days later, Jason showed up. I couldn't risk being seen with him, so I called police, other than Winter and his pals, to simply have Jason hauled away. I haven't heard anything more from him. But none of that is why I write this, even though it is what had led up to it. It was my belief that Jason had left town, perhaps the state, and maybe he did. I didn't know, but on January 9, 2009, Winter and Clark stopped by to tell me they learned Jason was testifying against them and me in my case against Perez. Jason knows enough about their crime, my business, as to destroy my case. Because of this, Winter said he would make certain that bastard never sees the light of that courtroom. If beating Jason, destroying his business and his reputation wasn't enough to stop him, I can only surmise what the next step will be. I don't know if Winter and his pals ever have killed anyone, but it sure gave me the feeling they would. They wanted to know if I had any clue where Jason would be hiding. This tells me they don't know, yet they won't stop searching. I've done so many things wrong in my life I'm not proud of, but I can't let my bad choices get someone killed. It is for this reason that I tell you these things, and it is why I am packing up and hiding as well. I have no doubt that Winter and his pals will come after me next. Again, I can't repeat enough how sorry I am, or that I ever got Jason mixed up in this mess. I just wanted out of debt and to live a quiet life. I really only wish him the best, and I hope he finds justice in all that has been done to him.